Hey everybody, Crow back again, and in this video I want to talk about a game I recently finished, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I spent a little over a month playing it because I didn't really play it, straight through. I played an hour here or there, and every time I finish a game like this, I kind of just want to make a video where I could just talk about it. And since Final Fantasy VII Remake, or even the original for that matter, is a game that people don't want spoiled if they're planning to play it, I plan on breaking this video out into three sections, where the first, no spoilers at all. Then I'll kind of transition into this second part where I'll talk about the story itself, and then the third part would pretty much be, the ending of the game and what I thought of it. So if you've watched my channel for a while, you would have seen that back in March I put out a video that was pretty much so I played the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo. And the reason I put out that video is because I was really on and off again as to whether or not I was actually interested in Final Fantasy VII Remake. I really enjoyed the original game. I played it through multiple times, although it was over 20 years ago, so I couldn't really remember the details of it. I just remember bits and pieces of it. So I was really unsure of how much I would remember, playing the remake. But yeah, I did actually, halfway through the game, started to question what was different or not in the remake. So I actually started watching playthroughs of the original Final Fantasy VII up to the Escape of Midgar, just so I could see what was different myself. But one of the things that made me not interested in the remake was the fact that it was no longer a turn-based RPG. It was more of this action-y thing that the current Final Fantasy games had kind of morphed into after Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy XI was an MMORPG, and I was interested in that. And then the Final Fantasy XII turned into this, kind of action RPG kind of thing, and that I didn't even bother playing that, and I kind of ignored the series since then because of that change in style. But you get my attention when you're going to remake a game that I played a lot and like over 20 years ago. The other thing that kind of turned me off is the fact that this was going to be part one of the remake. They weren't going to remake the whole game. They were going to release it in chunks. But I wound up playing the demo, and I actually enjoyed it. I mean, it took me a little bit of time to come to grips with how to play the game. The demo was about an hour long. It was like the first chapter of the game, and it was actually something I remember from playing it back in the day. So I decided after I finished the demo, and I said in that video, I'm going to pre-order it. So I pre-ordered it, I got the game, and I kind of started playing it almost right away. Not really right away, but maybe within a week of getting it. You got to remember, I'm playing Animal Crossing New Horizons as well, so that was taking up a good chunk of my time. So I started playing it, and the demo turned out to be pretty much exactly how the first chapter of the game played out, an hour long, and I played through. It was a little bit easier to understand this time, but as I started playing it more and more, I started to realize that the game was actually better than the demo itself, because the demo, you're really just fighting. You're not really exploring a whole lot. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of exploration to do in this game, as you're just stuck to a couple sectors of Midgar or whatever. I'm sorry if I'm already into spoiler territory, but I'm going to not consider it as spoiler. It's just that they took a 10-hour experience from the original Final Fantasy VII and expanded it to 50 to 60 hours. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I do like the changes, the minor tweaks in the storyline that they made. They actually made things make a whole lot more sense. And also expanded a lot of the other characters in the game. And I really like that. But let's talk, before I start talking about the plot at all, because I don't want to spoil anything too much right now, I want to talk about the battle system because I actually really enjoyed it. And as I'm playing, I mean, you could run around, you can attack whenever you want, but you have to wait for this little meter to fill up before you can use things like magic, special abilities, or use items and the like. And at first it threw me off, but After a while, I really started getting used to it, and then even after, I don't know how long I played it, but then I realized that this is pretty much almost exactly like how Kingdom Hearts plays, only a lot better. And the reason it's better is because whenever you want to use a magic spell or an ability or whatever, and you go into the menu system, the game actually slows way down. Now, it doesn't stop. Things are still going, and they're going in super slow motion, but it really gives you time to adjust and make your plans and everything. Not only that, but after a while, you start to realize that, hey, I could switch to these other characters and tell them, either control them outright or tell them what to do. And in Kingdom Hearts, not only that when you use the menu, does time not stop, you're still going in real time, you can't really tell Donald or Goofy to do anything. You can't say, hey, heal him or do that, or you can't can take control of those characters. So, I mean, I don't know how those other Final Fantasy games played out. We're talking about 12, 13, and 15, because I have not played those. I mean, they may play exactly the same way. And to be honest, I enjoyed the system so much, I actually sat there considering maybe I want to try Final Fantasy 15, maybe 13. I don't know. You're out of luck. So yeah, the limit breaks. I really enjoyed the limit breaks. It does take quite some time to build that up, and in my playthrough, it seemed like they didn't even happen all that often. But what seemed to happen even rare were summons. Because not only do you have your summon material like you had in the original Final Fantasy VII, the thing is that you can only have one summon attached per character at any one time. There's a specific slot for it. You can't summon the summon anytime you want. You have to wait for some certain circumstance for the summon to become available before you can select it. I don't really know how I feel about that, because it just seemed really weird, because you never knew when you were going to be available to pick a summon. Now, in the help or whatever, it said that it said, you know, if there's a particularly difficult battle, I'm paraphrasing here based on what I remember. If there's a particularly difficult battle, the summon meter will start to rise. When it fills out, then you can select one of your character summons, and they will come out and fight with you. Then you have to start using your own meters to have the summon do additional attacks, and then after a certain amount of time, the summon will do a final attack and leave. And the problem is, when I tried to look up how these actual summons decide when to show up, nobody had an answer. It's just like, well, they just decide whenever they decide. Because I swear I've had really long battles with creatures where the summon never decides to come out, and then other battles where they just, you know, always seem to come out. But it made the summons seem less important in a way, because you could not rely on them. You couldn't just say, hey, Shiva, come out and do your attack, like in those older Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII. Now, these summons have to build up a meter, come out, and fight with you. And it's kind of cool, but I'd rather just say use the summon ability, and like in the old games, and that way, you know, just use up one of your slots in your weapons or whatever for that material, instead of having just one specific slot for that. Speaking of which, the detail in the game is fantastic. I'll talk about some of the detail later, kind of during the spoilers, but I really liked how when you used a different weapon for each character, or they actually carried around that weapon, going as far as the detail where the materia that you collect and attach to that weapon, you can see it in the weapon and where it's located in that weapon, even as far as to whether or not it's connected or not. You can see that on the weapon in the real world as well. I'm not going to go into detail if you don't know what the materia is or whatever, but just note that the game is really, really detailed. Oh, before we go to spoilers, I want to also say that I really enjoyed the mini games that they threw into the game. There was this whack-a-box mini game I found really enjoyable. There's the mini game where you do the squat thrusts and the pull-ups, which are very reminiscent to what you did in the previous game as well. Then there's a dancing mini game, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the spoilers. It's just basically a rhythm game, which was fine, but not going to take any real rhythm games up to task. But what I really enjoyed was the dart game that you could play near, like in chapter 2 or chapter 3 or whatever. That dart game was pretty much the best representation of video game darts that I've ever seen. The Shenmue dart game or whatever, where you just kind of hit the button right when you think it's going to be fine. That's whatever. But this one, you really had to use the analog stick and, timing just right to throw the dart where you want it to go. And I thought it was fantastic. And I have to talk about how kind of goofy, like, the ragdoll physics is for some of the items, because there are certain chairs and objects that are in the world where you can just walk right into them and they just kind of fly all over the place. And it kind of takes a little bit of the realism out of it. But I found myself enjoying just running around and trying to, knock all these chairs over. And it's kind of funny when you're in a populated area and everybody's just going around and there you are running around and knocking stuff all over the place. But they actually turned a little bit of a mini game into that, because there's one part of the game where we're trying to sneak out of a house without being noticed, and you have to navigate this area without knocking anything over. And you don't fail if you do. And you just wind up looking so weird trying to navigate that area. Not only that, but now that I think about it, some of the NPCs were acting really weird. There are some side missions that you need to do where you talk to a guy and they're like, okay, we'll go do this. And normally you would go do it and come back. But there was one guy in particular, but for some reason you talk to him and you accept the mission and he goes to a different location. I thought I was supposed to follow him. So I started following him, and eventually gets to the place where he needs to go, but he couldn't get to the place he needed to go. So he started walking around like a drunk, and it was kind of amusing until I realized, oh, I'm not even supposed to talk to him again. Now, the game menus were pretty easy to navigate for the most part, especially once you got used to them. But if there's only one complaint I have about that, would be upgrading your weapons. Since you can upgrade your weapons, because there's only a handful of weapons for each character in the game, in order to add material slots or give your characters more abilities, you can upgrade the weapon, which I found interesting. But the way it's represented is like you are looking at the DNA of the weapon itself, and you have to go through and select what you want in the different cores. There's the core, the subcore 2, or whatever, and it lists like what you can upgrade. But then as soon as you go to select it, you kind of have to cycle around the whole thing till you can find what you want. And I just thought that was very cumbersome. I would have preferred like somewhat of just like a separate list, because as soon as you're like, oh, I want to upgrade that, well, then you select that core and you go into it. But then you have to kind of like, where is it? They could have done that a little bit more cleaner. But that's really the extent of my complaints with, the menus. Part 2, story spoilers. All right, let's talk about some minor story spoilers, or story spoilers and altogether. Things happen in the game that didn't originally happen in the original Final Fantasy VII, or they happened differently. And for the stuff they added, I could kind of agree with. There's a mission that you go on with Jesse that was kind of added into the game, where you have to infiltrate a Shinra depot or whatever, so you could get more explosives. That was pretty interesting. But it was also another addition to adding in that motorcycle bike game or whatever that you would only see escaping Midgar in the original Final Fantasy VII. They added it a little bit earlier in this game as well, so you could do it more than once, I guess. But what was really weird about that section is that they kind of introduced this new character that hadn't been seen before, Roche or whatever he was called, and he seemed to be a soldier himself. And you fight him on the motorbike, you fight him in the depot, but then you don't see or hear from him again for the rest of the game. And I thought that was really bizarre that they kind of introduced this character, but didn't really keep antagonizing the group at all. He just kind of vanishes kind of before the midpoint of the game, so that was kind of weird. The other thing that was interesting is the fact that in the original Final Fantasy VII, like certain scenes, like President Shinra coming out to lambast the group personally when they're trying to blow up the second reactor, Uh, like, that doesn't really make much sense if you think about it, but in this game, he's a hologram, he's projecting himself. He's not actually there. That makes more sense. Also, like a scene where Sang, I believe, the leader of the Turks, is kind of yelling at the group from a helicopter in the original game. I mean, if you think about it, it doesn't make much sense. How would they be able to hear him with the helicopter and everything and have a normal conversation? Whereas in this game, it's like a video thing over monitor. That makes way more sense. So for the most part, I think the changes were pretty good. The only changes I thought were kind of strange, but in a way I can see why they wanted to do it, is in the original Final Fantasy VII, you only heard of Sephiroth up until the point you escape Midgar. You don't see Sephiroth at all. You see some of the people he's killed, but you don't see him at all. But in this game, right in Chapter 2, we have Cloud hallucinating him. You see him. Major kind of near the end of game spoilers now. Like the president of Shinra. In the original Final Fantasy VII, you see him with Sephiroth's sword through him. But in this game, bam, he kills that guy right in front of you. So you see it, no doubt. He also kills people that you wouldn't expect to see killed. Which also takes me to another big thing. We'll get back to Sephiroth later, but the shadows. In the game, not the shadows, they're whispers. You don't know what these things are flying around all the time. They were in the original game, but you don't know what these whispers are. But then you find out that, it's this new added element to what the whispers do is they try to help the planet and everything reach its own personal destiny, if I'm understanding correctly. And I didn't understand why they were in the game, but when we get to the end of the game spoilers, I'll get to that. But not only like Sephiroth showing up way early, there's like one scene that kind of sticks out in my mind where Cat Sith or however you want to say it, we see him like for a few seconds in the game as a cameo. And yeah, they took one of my favorite sections from Final Fantasy VII, the whole wall market section where you're there with Aerith and you're trying to help Tifa get out of Don Corneo's mansion. And they changed things up a bit, but they made it way more entertaining than it was before. In the original one, Cloud, I guess Aerith just decides, hey, Cloud, you need to dress like a woman to help me out. And so you go through, and you pick the best stuff and everything. And that's just the only way it happens. But they added so much more to that in this remake, and it all culminates to it being other people's ideas, and they add a whole lot more character to the characters, additional characters to Wall Market, and I really enjoyed those characters. But it all culminates to this dance number that Cloud does with character's name I can't remember at the moment, but that's where this dancing mini game takes place. And at the end of it, they basically transforms him to look like a woman to infiltrate Don Corneo's mansion, and I thought that played out way better in the remake than it did in the original. And that whole scene with the character and Don Corneo himself, looked fantastic, which brings me to characters that I thought looked really good, like Red 13, who does kind of make a cameo in the game. He joins your party, but you really can't. He's the only one that you can't control. They make it so he's either fighting with one group or the other. And then the other character I thought looked really fantastic was Hojo. They did a fantastic job making him look like the creepy scientist and everything. That was probably one of my favorite models in the game was Hojo. They made him look great. But speaking of which, other memorable parts of the game, some of the monsters, when you're fighting in Don Corneo's fight arena and you're winning it all, and he's like, you guys have to do one final match, and then they're like up from the ground, it's Hell House! The Hell House! And everybody's like, yeah, Hell House, and you have to fight a house. Again, Hell House was in the original Final Fantasy VII, but it wasn't a boss or anything, but they just upgraded Hell House to hell, and to hell. Also, the other enemy that really sticks out to me, the other boss, was Swordipede. Come on, think of it, Swordipede. He's a centipede made of swords, and basically at that point in time of the game, your party's split So Cloud and Barret are fighting the first half, and then Enrage It, and then you have to fight the second half with Aerith and Tifa. I thought that was a fun battle. I really enjoyed Swordipede.
Get him!
Part 3. End of game spoilers. If you don't care about the ending of the game being spoiled, or you've already known, then keep watching, otherwise stop the video. I was kind of hoping that Sephiroth wouldn't be the final boss of the game. I was hoping that they would save him for the final game, but no, they could not resist. You get to the end of chapter 17, which is the second to the last chapter, and you've escaped Midgar. So I was thinking, oh, well, that's kind of weird. How does this game keep going if the even on the box it said you play until the escape of Midgar? But this is where all these whispers come into play, because all of a sudden Sephiroth shows up and he invites you to this other place, which was the Singularity. And that was the whole last chapter, is you going to the Singularity and fighting your destiny. Now, what was interesting about it is they only saw glimpses of the future, so they see the meteor coming to destroy the planet. But I don't think they know much more than that, so they want to change that destiny. Meanwhile, Sephiroth knows he's going to be defeated, so he wants to change his destiny. Henceforth, he invites them all to the Singularity with the Whispers. And so they have these big giant fights against Destiny, or these Whispers or whatever. And then all of a sudden, you have to have a fight with Sephiroth. And I was like, no! Save that for the last game. I mean, it's bad enough that you were showing him throughout the whole game, but now you're making Sephiroth the boss, the final boss of the first installment of this. And I thought that was rather goofy. So then right before the credits roll, you see the unknown journey will continue. And what this is telling me is that, okay, they stuck pretty close to the first part of Final Fantasy VII. You escape from Midgar, but then this whole deal with the Whispers and fighting your destiny means that they can change whatever they want in the next couple parts, because the future is unknown. And even though you may have played the original games and knows how that plays out, different things are happening. You approach the Singularity, which was all these different timelines, and now I think everything's screwed up. I mean, Zack may still be alive. That was the other thing, is they show Zack in the last chapter, and people who haven't played or don't know who Zack is were like, I don't know who that guy is. That doesn't make any sense. Well, I guess it's a teaser for a future game. But yeah, they're basically just going to say, okay, we're going to do whatever we want. We don't need to follow the plot of Final Fantasy VII with this remake. We could have it end however we want. And, again, spoilers. And, this was spoiled to me way before the game even came out, the original Final Fantasy VII. Aerith dies. I saw that cutscene tons of times before the game even came out. But perhaps in this version, Aerith won't die. Maybe somebody else will die. That leads me to the other thing, is when is the sequel going to come out? Now I'm hearing it's not going to come out to 2023. So we have to wait 3 years. And am I going to have to buy a PS5 now in order to play it? How will my game save from this version transfer over to the second part? There should be something. If I'm level 50 now, I should be level 50 when I continue playing the game. I should have all the items going over when I'm playing the game. You gotta have your progress carry over from game to game. But if these different parts of Final Fantasy VII are going to be on different platforms, that may be a hard thing to do. So, yeah, overall, I like the game. I kind of was disappointed the fact that Sephiroth was the last boss. The fact that he kept showing up to the game, the Whispers kind of threw me off. But then if you think about it in terms of, well, you know what? They've kind of mixed all these different timelines together, and who knows what's going to happen now. It kind of makes more sense to me. So I can kind of approve of it, knowing that, maybe the original Final Fantasy VII, that was a different timeline than this Final Fantasy VII Remake. Totally different timeline. And when you think about it that way, Yeah, they could pretty much do a lot of things similarly, and they can depart drastically as well. And I guess I'm looking forward to the second part even more now, not knowing what's going to happen, knowing things will drastically be different, and being told in a way that actually makes a little bit more sense than the original game was. So, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. See y'all next time.